Greetings, Pastor Steve. Just getting back to you with kind of a summary talk through of Leading With A Limp, Chapter 4. Fascinating chapter title. It's failing that matters. Nothing succeeds like imperfection. We go, I didn't even miswrite the title. Shouldn't it be? It's success that matters. Nothing succeeds like achievement. But no, as the Bible understands leadership, failing matters, and actually in our imperfection, we end up succeeding with God's help. And just before I get into the stuff on the sheet that we talked about today and some of the questions we talked through, something that came to my mind as I'm preparing for today is that without God's understanding of how life works and that we do fail, leaders tend to be viewed as, well, if you lead well, great, we'll keep you. If you don't lead well, we will discard you. If you fail, we'll discard you. We'll get somebody else who doesn't mess up. The Bible, through the biblical story, how God works with leaders is when they fail, God does not discard them. He redeems them. He works with them. He teaches them lessons. He helps them grow up. He helps them mature. He brings them back up to even higher level. He redeems them. He doesn't discard them. So just basically, as we think about that, if we can't fail as leaders and recognize failure in ourselves, we end up discarding ourselves or writing ourselves off or trying to hide. But if we can admit that we fail and be honest with that about the people that we are leading, then they can be honest that they fail too. And together, we can let God redeem us, redeem our story, and make things better. So it's really an important chapter. It seems kind of counterintuitive. He talks in the chapter about limping into chaos. And, what does a leader do? When chaos comes, do you circle the wagons? Do you get defensive? Do you begin to say, okay, who's to blame? Who's going to go down with this ship? Because I'm not going down with this ship because it wasn't my fault. That's one approach to chaos. Or do we say as leaders when chaos comes, what's going on? What's happening? And what can we do to move forward to get things fixed? Very different approaches. And you and I have gut level reactions to chaos. Oh, what are we going to do? Are we going to fix it? Or are we going to blame somebody? Or are we going to put our head in the sand and hide and hope that it just goes away? Then he talks about two biblical leaders. One is the Apostle Paul, fascinating person. God's Spirit used the Apostle Paul to write most of the letters in the New Testament. And so Paul, through his letters, has influenced the entire history of the Christian church. So Paul wasn't just some guy writing letters to small house churches back then. God used him to influence the church throughout human history to date. But when Paul thinks of himself, he does not think of himself as a success. He says, I failed, and God is redeeming my failure, but I'm still going to think of myself as one who is really unworthy of what God did with me. He says, I am a chief sinner. So when Paul wrote to a house church a letter, or worked with co-workers, or was preaching or teaching in these house churches that he traveled around and visited, even though he was greatly respected, Paul never put himself above the people he spoke to. He said, no, I'm actually below you. I'm a great failure in my life. I mean, God has forgiven me and redeemed me, but I'm the chief of sinners. And as he's talking about the Apostle Paul's work, Alander writes, God calls us to brokenness, not performance, to relationships, not commotion, busyness, to grace, not success. And it may sound counterintuitive. Wait a minute, isn't leadership about performance and busyness and success? Well, from God's perspective, we're called to admit our own brokenness. Then God can do something worthwhile with us. If we don't admit we're broken, things spin out of control. We're called to relationships. Whatever we do, we're actually building and helping people grow up. That's what we're doing, relationships. And to grace, help people where they're at. And if they're at fault, they're at fault, but let's help move beyond that and get going and see what God can do with our lives. He has an interesting statement in the chapter. It says, the leader who fails to face his darkness must live with fear and hypocrisy. The result will be a defensiveness that places saving face and controlling others as higher goods than blessing others and doing good work. If I can't admit my own failures, and I do fail, and they come from time to time, right? Then I will have to be defensive and defend myself and hope nobody finds out that I failed, or hope no one finds out I failed as badly as I did. And I will have to control the situation, which means controlling my emotions and trying to controlling the emotions and thought patterns of people around me. And I will be forgetting all about blessing people, leading well, and moving forward doing good with the responsibilities that I have. So we need to recognize the chaos of the brokenness in our own life first and bring that to God so He can redeem it, so we can be a redeeming factor in the lives of people that we lead. He also talks about Moses, and that leading begins with the desire that we have. Have to have desire to be a leader. And for Moses, he desired to save his people from slavery. He tried at the beginning of his story by killing an Egyptian taskmaster. That didn't work. Moses had to flee the country. God eventually met him in the wilderness, then brought him back, redeemed his leadership. So Moses changes from being a murderer to a leader of people to freedom. That's because God met him in his point of failure and redeemed him and brought him back to a better place. But Moses had the desire. We all have something that fuels our desire to lead. Something. And we want to move the people we're with from where they're at. Manager just says, "Oh, this is what we're doing. This is who's here. I'm going to manage it so everything works fine. Everybody's happy. Everybody's safe." Leader says, "The status quo is not good enough. We need to move forward to a place, a better place." And that desire kind of pulls a leader forward. The question is for today. Great discussion at the table. It's interesting. First one off this statement. When we lead from a place of weakness, we are not abandoning leadership. We are, however, making it clear that we do not view ourselves as better than anyone else. Honesty and transparency create a desire in those around us to follow our leadership. We talked about, what's that one weakness you have that you don't want to share with anybody that you lead on your staff? Why? Why? Do you think you're perfect? They don't think you're perfect. I mean, everybody I've ever led knows I'm not perfect. They know my weaknesses. Why would I not admit them and talk about them? So they know God is redeeming me, and God's redeeming them, and together God's lifting us up and He's moving us forward. And then think back, as you work with different leaders in your life, as you work with your staff, there are certain times where you could have told a story from your life, whether a success story or a failure story, a learning story, that would have really helped them and helped you lead them to a better place. And did you take advantage of it, or did you resist it because you didn't want to be vulnerable, didn't want to be honest? There's something really powerful about a leader being honest about their own weaknesses and failures. If I've told you that I know when I failed, and this is what happened, and this is what happened as a result, and I had to go through this, and I learned this, and I'm still here. God's using me. Then when people I'm leading, when they fail, they can come talk to me about that. And I can listen, I can ask questions, and I can say, okay, what's going on? What did you learn? How God's working with you? What do you think? How can we get you to a better place? So there's no fear. Being honest about our weakness as leaders removes fear from the minds of the people who follow us, because they can be honest with us too when things don't go right. Now, one of the questions I thought was really interesting. Think about the meetings you've been in the last couple of weeks. When could you have been more forthright in your comments or discussion? Every once in a while I'm done with a conversation with a person and I go, I didn't lie. I was not inaccurate. I was truthful. But there could have been a better discussion that I was afraid of having, or didn't think I was ready to have, or it would have gotten into one of my areas of weaknesses that I just didn't want to deal with. But those honest conversations I think they up the power of leadership for a person when we're honest and humble and human in who we are. The second kind of group of questions had to do around this statement. Number 2, the leader who wholeheartedly desires improvement celebrates the organization's success. Yeah, good job. But also can't wait to look at new ways to improve and make it even better. So it's this 2-step. We're going to celebrate. Yay, this went well. Great. And just live in the celebration for a time. And then there's a time to transition. Go, okay, now, that was great. Let's look to the future and think about how we can continue to improve what we do. And we talked about, what's your primary desire to be a leader? Is it to be at the top? Is it to achieve? Is it success? Is it I want to be liked? Because that primary desire, the real fuel for us to be a leader, can make us effective or ineffective in terms of being able to celebrate and then being able to think about the future. And we talked about when we've worked with people, we've worked with someone or under someone who is never satisfied. And I mean in a negative way. No compliments. It was never good enough. You missed that. Why didn't you do better? Why did you fail? How does that affect you? And then, have you ever worked with a leader who was always looking to improve in a positive way? They say, great job, that's good. Next time, what do you think we can do to do even better? With that kind of positive improvement attitude, has that affected you and your work? And then the challenge question I thought was great. Ask a colleague who you trust to tell you how they see you. Do you lean towards being never satisfied and negative? Or do you lean towards always looking to improve and being positive in that approach? And just ask someone that you trust to just tell you how they see you. It's fascinating as leaders, we see ourselves a certain way, and it may or may not be in line with how other people see us. We just need to know. I mean, if I come across as never satisfied and negative, I need to know because I will never be able to help people improve if that's how they experience me. I want them to see me as a person who positively celebrates the good stuff and say, let's figure out how we can even do better at this in the future. So great stories and a great topic about being willing to admit our failures. I mean, they're there. Why hide them? To learn from them, to let God redeem us. We don't discard ourselves. We shouldn't discard people around us. God doesn't discard us. But in our failure, He actually redeems us, lifts us up, and continues to mold us into the people He wants us to be. So enjoy the chapter. Give it some good thought time. It'll be worth it. Next week we'll be on to chapter 5. Thanks for being a part.